Hello, Paradise Panther artists. I am Mrs. Telfer, and I am here with you again today to introduce you to our next master artist, Rembrandt van Rijn. Rembrandt was a Dutch artist who was born over 400 years ago. He is known as a master at using light and shadow in his artwork. Also, when he was young, he liked to look in the mirror and make lots of silly faces, and then go paint himself. Try to imagine what kind of faces did he make as he looked in the mirror. We're going to be looking at several of his self-portraits today. So let's go ahead and get ready to learn a little bit more about our next artist, Rembrandt. Go ahead and raise your hand if you enjoy dressing up for Halloween. I bet there are a lot of hands raised in your room right now. Thank you. You can go ahead and all put your hands down now. Part of the fun of Halloween, besides the candy, is pretending to be someone you're not and dressing up in different clothes or costumes. Our artists today love to dress up in costumes and make silly faces. But he lived about 400 years ago, before the invention of the camera. So instead of taking a photograph of himself, he would paint a self-portrait or do sketches of himself that he turned into artwork. Today, we will meet our master artist through his self-portraits. I would like to introduce you to Rembrandt. Try to imagine young Rembrandt trying out different expressions in a mirror and then doing these self-portraits. As a young man, he probably had not thought of showing himself to future generations through his self-portraits. He was like an actor practicing before a mirror. He wanted to be able to express feelings in his paintings, feelings that the viewer could see and understand right away. Rembrandt had a strong and bold personality, and it shows in his self-portraits. During his lifetime, Rembrandt did more than 90 self-portraits. We can learn a lot about him by seeing how he looked at himself from youth to old age. Rembrandt's self-portraits became quite an autobiography of his life. To follow his explorations of his own face is like reading a book and gaining an understanding of this man and his life. Rembrandt studied his face intently to see how his eyebrows came together and how his jaw pushed forward. Here, he looks angry, outraged, and surprised. These expressions fascinated him, and he quickly sketched what he saw in the mirror. He started his visual autobiography at a young age. Why? Because he was probably simply in need of a model. No one else was available. His father was working in the mill, his mother was at church, and his sister was in the kitchen. Besides, with himself as the model, he could do anything he pleased. Perhaps a friend or a relative would not cooperate, or they might feel embarrassed at striking such strange poses or making such silly faces. Rembrandt's family lived in what is officially called the Netherlands. The common name we know is Holland, and the people are called Dutch. Isn't that a lot of names for such a small country? Do you happen to know of any other great artists from Holland? Well, you actually do, because we have studied 3 master artists who are all from Holland in our Meet the Masters art program. Their names are Vincent van Gogh, Piet Mondrian, and M.C. Escher. Rembrandt's father worked in a windmill, like the one you see here, in this artwork by Rembrandt. Windmills were, and still are, very common in Holland. People either lived next to windmills or even inside of them. In your art activity with Mr. Tyler, you will be creating realistic windmills in a Dutch landscape. Windmills were necessary for powering the wheels that ground grains like wheat and rice. Rembrandt left his small village of Leiden in Holland and moved to the busy and prosperous city of Amsterdam, where he soon was as wealthy as the people whose portraits he painted. He was a success because he was so good at capturing what people really looked like in their portraits. People also were pleased with the beautiful golden light that he used so well in his paintings. He was only 28 years old when order after order came in. Let's find out. What did he do with his money? Besides practical things, Rembrandt also bought trunks full of robes, hats, feathered plumes, gold neck chains, antique armor and weapons, and background props for use in his paintings. He would display his collection in his studio and let his clients choose what they wanted in their portraits. It was like designing a movie set. Next, let's see what this lady chose as her costume. Look carefully at this painting. What do you see that is held in her dress and decorates her hat? Well, watch as I show you the flowers and leaves that we see in her hat, as well as the flowers and leaves that are on her skirt. What season of the year do you associate with green leaves and pretty flowers that are just blooming? Go ahead and raise your hand and your teacher will call on you. If you said spring, you got it. This portrait is showing a good friend portraying Flora, the goddess or queen of spring. Notice the flowers in her right hand, right here. Those flowers are taken from the ones in her skirt, which she holds like an apron. She seems to offer them to someone beyond the canvas at the left. This is one of Rembrandt's rare profile portraits. Go ahead and turn your head sideways, like you are showing me your profile. Give it a try. That's it. Great profiles. Now, look closely to see the part of the painting that shows realistic details and is touched richly with golden light. Watch as I show you the golden light that we see on her sleeves and on her dress and on her face. The golden light that shines on her face and clothing is one of the trademarks of Rembrandt's style of painting. Notice how the lighting in the background is dark. Let me show you here. Here is the dark background. Rembrandt skillfully uses highlights and shadows. Dark areas next to these light areas show contrast. This man is wearing a ruler or a king costume. I'm wondering if he really is a king from a faraway place, or if he is just pretending. Here is a good view of some of the robes and jewelry that Rembrandt had for his clients and models to wear. Look at the rich-looking fabric and the shining gold. We can see his use of golden light against the dark background again. Let's look closely here. We see a touch of golden light on his shoulder, his neck and the side of his face, as well as on the side of his hat. This contrasts with the darker shadow on the other part of his body here, and the shadow and darkness in the background. It's fairly easy to identify a painting by Rembrandt because he developed a painting style using light and dark that is unlike that of any other artist. There is even a special kind of lighting in photography where objects in shadow appear to glow with a golden light. It is called Rembrandt Lighting. Let's look for that Rembrandt lighting in this next group portrait. Here, we can see that special Rembrandt lighting, that golden light. We can see the golden light in the two men in the front here. We also see the golden light in the little girl right here. And we see this golden light in the faces of the men in the background. Right here. Rembrandt brings that special glowing light out of the shadows to highlight those parts. This painting is titled The Night Watch and is one of Rembrandt's famous masterpieces. In the year 1640, 18 members of the captain's militia company collected money to have their portraits painted. Since they wanted an excellent portrait, they decided to hire the most popular portrait painter in Amsterdam. And who do you think that would be? Well, Rembrandt, of course. They had seen his work on other group portraits, and they could tell exactly who each person in the picture was. As soldiers, they stood nice and straight and were patient as Rembrandt worked on their sketches. I'm sure they stood in nice, neat rows, so Rembrandt could see them. When the painting was finished almost 2 years later, it was not at all what they expected. They had waited 2 long years, and they were not happy with what they saw. Let's see if we can discover why this painting surprised and even shocked the militiamen of Amsterdam. Well, if you had paid the artist and posed for him for many tiring hours, how would you feel if your face didn't even show? Look carefully here, as we can see this army man has his arm outstretched that is blocking the face of the man to the left of him. Remember, this is a company of militiamen. I'm wondering, why would there be a little girl? No one could understand why Rembrandt added 16 imaginary figures to the composition and made many of them, like this little girl here, embraced with light to shine even more brightly than the men around her. Rembrandt highlighted her and made her stand out. This made the men outraged. When the men posed, they all dressed in their matching uniforms, stood in a row, and tried their best to look distinguished. But we can see that the artist Rembrandt changed that. He made the men all dressed differently, and everyone was doing something different. The painting is disorderly, and many of them had strange expressions on their faces. Rembrandt was apparently bored with the idea of a typical group portrait, so he decided to do something different. Instead of painting the men standing and looking at him, he chose to show them in action at the moment they received their marching orders. The scene is one of total confusion. Everyone is moving in different directions. The whole group looks disorganized or confused. Show me with a thumbs up or a thumbs down. Do you think the militia group ever hung this portrait? Show your teacher with a thumbs up or a thumbs down. What do you think? Great, you can go ahead and put your thumbs down now. Yes, it was hung in the Amsterdam Town Hall, even though the reactions were very mixed. But Rembrandt's reputation suffered, and his work became less popular. Then the painting was hung in a dark corner of the Regiment Hall for many years. It became so blackened by tobacco smoke and dirt that people named it the Night Watch. When the Night Watch was thoroughly cleaned in 1947, the painting was dramatically restored to its early brightness. But the title, Night Watch, has remained. Rembrandt's original title is lost to history, but his interesting painting with its mysteries still fascinates us to this day. Since then, it has been the popular centerpiece of the Amsterdam Museum, always crowded with art lovers amazed at Rembrandt's masterpiece. Now, let's look at the last group portrait that Rembrandt painted 20 years later. Let's see if he learned his lesson and painted what the men really wanted. Here we see a group of businessmen and leaders. They are 5 leaders of the clothmakers group, and their president asked Rembrandt to paint a group portrait. So Rembrandt put aside his self-portraits and pictures of Bible stories and set a fresh canvas on his easel. This was painted 20 years after he finished the Night Watch. Now, let's find the man who is the servant and not the leader. We see the servant here. He is behind the other man, and he is not wearing a hat. So those are good clues to us that he is not a leader. Notice how it seems as if the men are looking out at the artist or out at us. By painting it this way, we get the feeling that we have just walked in on their meeting, and they all look up to see who is entering the room. Doesn't it seem that they will soon turn back to their work? Rembrandt was very smart to make us feel a part of the picture in this way. Now I want you to think, in what ways is this painting different from the Night Watch? Go ahead and raise your hand if you have an idea, and your teacher will call on you. Here, we see that this painting has no action, and everyone's face is clearly seen. Also, there are no dark shadows and no imaginary people. In this painting, Rembrandt highlighted the men's faces that we see here with a golden light. He also highlighted the red in the tablecloth here. And he also highlighted the walls in the painting here. I'm wondering, did the cloth makers group like this portrait? Yes, they did. The members all approved. They liked it because all of the faces were showing. They were all dressed alike, and it is orderly and serious in the painting. All his life, Rembrandt's deepest ambition was to show human feelings with his art. This at first meant simply making faces, laughter, amazement, scowling, snarling. But as he grew older, he abandoned the outrageous expressions and feelings, and he looked closely at himself with a sad and thoughtful eye. Rembrandt was 34 years old in this portrait and was a very popular artist by this time. It shows him all decked out in a rich costume, looking confident as Holland's most successful painter. He was very busy and very wealthy and enjoyed every minute of his popularity. Let's see how he paints himself 20 years later. Here we can see many differences from his last self-portrait. In this one, he looks older, serious, tired, or depressed. When this was painted, Rembrandt was 54 years old, and he died just 9 years later. To know why he looks so serious, I will tell you some of the events that happened to Rembrandt. It seemed more and more that Rembrandt was having trouble pleasing his clients. There developed a change in Dutch taste in art. The wealthy citizens developed a fondness for showiness and elegance. They turned away from an artist who seemed dark. His art demanded that they devote some thought to their viewing, and most people were not willing to do that. Rembrandt refused to change his style, even though he needed the money. His wife had died, and soon after his small son died as well. Rembrandt plunged into his work to forget his loneliness, so he hardly noticed that the rich people of Amsterdam began to avoid him. But the bill collectors arrived steadily at his door. He spent money recklessly until he became penniless. He was bankrupt. He lost his home and all his belongings. These were dark days for Rembrandt, and all the tragedies are reflected in his face in this self-portrait, painted 9 years before he died. In this last self-portrait, Rembrandt was going blind at the time. His curly hair had grown white, his cheeks puffy, but his expression was calm. He was all alone with only his paint supplies. He had nothing left but his art. No family, no home, no belongings. After his death, a lawyer made a list of his possessions, and they consisted of a few canvases, clothing, 10 hats, and 1 Bible. But he left behind so much more in all of his beautiful paintings, etchings, drawings, and sketches. Here's a final look at the art words we learned today for our master artist Rembrandt. Remember that a self-portrait is a portrait of an artist created by him or herself. A portrait is a painting of another person. Highlight is the area where light is hitting an object, and the opposite is shadow, which is the area where the light is not hitting or is being blocked by an object. The shadow is the darker area. These opposite elements, highlight and shadow, create a contrast in a piece of artwork. I hope you enjoyed learning about one of the greatest artists in history. During his lifetime, Rembrandt painted over 600 paintings, and his home in Amsterdam has been turned into the Rembrandt House Museum. Wouldn't it be great to one day travel to Amsterdam to see some of his amazing artwork? Well, up next, I can't wait to see your windmill art projects with Mr. Tyler. I hope you all have a great day. See you next time.